even in an episode of the popular show The Simpsons, they had an episode where they were driving into Winnipeg from the States, and there's a big sign that said, "Welcome to Winnipeg. We were born here. What's your excuse?"
Welcome to English with Lewis. Let's go! Hello, everybody, and welcome back once again to English with Lewis. And it's another week. We have another amazing guest to be speaking about some random topics, going over some modern slang, and also maybe teaching some idioms towards the end. So I hope you're ready, raring, and looking forward to getting started. That said, Avery, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. Thanks for having me here. My name's Avery. I'm from the social media channel Arc English, and simply put, I help people figure out the best strategies to learn English, and I try to associate imagery with vocabulary to expand people's vocabulary in the English language. So, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm looking forward to having a chat. And
yeah, likewise.
First of all, let's start with whereabouts you're from in Canada. Are you from one of the big cities, Vancouver, Montreal?
Yeah, so originally I come from a city that is called Winnipeg. It's in the middle of Canada, just above the border of the United States of America. So after high school, I moved over to a city called Montreal, which is in the French region of the country of Canada. So they speak a lot of French there. So I've been living in Montreal since the age of 18. I've been here for roughly a little less than 10 years now. So yeah, that's basically it. I plan to stay here for the foreseeable future. And that's where I am, Canada.
Oh, interesting. So I recognize the name Winnipeg, but maybe only from watching like American sitcoms or TV shows. And then it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, that Winnipeg is one of these cities that Americans kind of joke about and make fun of. Is that the case?
It's a city that both Americans and Canadians joke and make fun of. It's known for being extremely cold. It has very brutal winters, and essentially, even in an episode of the popular show The Simpsons, they had an episode where they were driving into Winnipeg from the States, and there's a big sign that said, "Welcome to Winnipeg. We were born here. What's your excuse?" Essentially illustrating that it's not a desirable city to be in, just due to the weather. And honestly, there's a lack of things to do too. Hence why I moved and went to Montreal. So don't mean to disrespect my city, but I have to keep it real. I have to be honest. It's I wouldn't recommend it for people looking to travel or move to Canada. So
interesting. Cool. So I was right. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, why Montreal and not Vancouver or Toronto or other places in Canada?
Yeah, so I used to be a basketball player. So coming out of high school, I had a choice to make as to which university to go play basketball at on a scholarship. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go to a university that was called McGill University, which is located in the city of Montreal. So I went there. I went to school. It's a completely English school as well, even though it's located in a French-speaking region. However, I just fell in love with the city. The city of Montreal, in my opinion, is superior to the city of Winnipeg. So I decided to stick around and find a job after I was done playing basketball in Montreal. So,
excellent. And what was your first job there in Montreal?
Yeah. After playing basketball, I did a few tournaments around the world, but then I came back and I started working in real estate. So I'm a commercial real estate broker. Real estate was just something that interested me in university. I was in the real estate club at the university, and then I just networked with some people in town, and then found a job, and haven't looked back ever since. So.
Okay, excellent. It's interesting because many of the people I interview on this channel are also 100% full-time English teachers. and content creators. So you're
Yeah.
one of the exceptions that your main source of income and full-time job is actually in real estate.
Yep.
So what is the job like? Because what I can imagine is that you have all of these houses that you're trying to sell or rent out. You have to go and do some showings. Tell me a bit more about the day-to-day of working in real estate.
Yeah. So as a commercial real estate broker, so we actually don't deal with houses at all. We only deal with office buildings, shopping centers, industrial warehouses, big pieces of land that are used to develop buildings and things among that nature. So we work a lot. It's very people oriented. So essentially our day, it's really simple, honestly. We spend all day simply finding opportunities, people who need to rent their buildings or people who need to sell their buildings or buy buildings. And then we try to get as many offers as possible to the people who are trying to rent or trying to sell. We literally just try to do those two things repeatedly over and over throughout the year. It's an exciting job, but it's very unstable, which is why we work so much, just to increase the chances of success. So.
Okay, so if it's kind of the same thing over and over again, does it get a little bit boring?
I explained it on a very high level, surface level, but every single deal is different. The people you're dealing with are going to have different personalities. The properties you're dealing with are going to have different nuances to them. Some properties may be very large. They may be 100,000 square feet, and some might be 2,000 square feet. Some might have one tenant inside of them. Some might have 100 tenants inside of them. So things can get complicated very quickly, depending on the situation. And you have to take into account everything that's going on in your city. So all the developments happening in the area, what may make this place more desirable or less desirable for a company that wants to lease there. And also, of course, negotiating deals. If McDonald's wants to come along and lease a building, McDonald's, they're a very well-known brand. They do very well financially. So they tend to have a big list of requirements that they want the landlord to meet. I could talk about this for years, literally. There's so much that goes into it. But simply put, every deal, case by case, is a little bit different. So, yeah.
No, it's always interesting finding out like what other jobs and professions are actually like, because I have certain friends who work in different industries. One of them works in music, another's a psychologist, another's a lawyer. And when you're having a job and your day-to-day is completely the opposite thing to what they do, it's interesting to have a little bit of an opinion and an insight into what it is that other people do, because that way you can understand them as people and also understand their routines as well. And that being said, a question. The pandemic made a lot of people start working remotely. Has this affected your job? And did it mean that there was less of a demand for office buildings, for example?
It's funny that you brought that up. I actually started working in real estate in March 2020, which was the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah. It was just before. And then when I started the job, then the pandemic happened 1 week later.
Oh, wow.
So it's yes. The answer is yes. The office buildings emptied out a lot, and the only ones that still have tenants in them to this day are the extremely luxurious and very nice office buildings located in downtown areas and other very desirable places. Prestigious law firms still rent office spaces. Google still rents office spaces. Very big tech still rents office spaces. Very specialized government uses still use office, but for all the people in between, In smaller, more suburban office spaces, yeah, those things have emptied a lot. We've seen record vacancy rates when it comes to office buildings.
Yeah, I know. It's a
Yeah.
crazy change, like everything since the pandemic, how things changed. For a lot of English teachers, for example, we went from working in classrooms and
Yeah.
academies to then suddenly transitioning to teaching online and on Zoom. And
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for that because it
Yeah.
allows me to travel much more, to
Mhm.
wake up later to teach my first class of the day. For
Yeah.
me, there are much more advantages
Mhm.
than disadvantages. Um,
Mhm.
but what about you? Do you work remotely or in an office?
Well, we hop around town all the time. So, I mean, sometimes I'll be at home, then I'll go show a space, and then I'll go to the office, come back home.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it's in the reverse order. I'll start at the office, I'll go show a space, I'll go back home early. Every day is a little bit different. So I guess we would call that a hybrid job in English. So yeah.
Like where you have the best of both worlds, I guess, a little bit of everything.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. It's a very, very active job. It's not even so much of a job. We're kind of seen as independent contractors,
Uh-huh.
just meaning we essentially do our own thing. We pick our own hours, and we're basically set on a commission structure as opposed to a salary structure. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Is that stressful, knowing that you don't have a set wage or salary every month?
Yes. Yes. It's a little bit stressful just because even if you have a lot of action going on, it's still a little bit difficult to predict what is going to actually, which deals are going to finalize and which deals are going to fall through at the end.
Mhm.
So it's extremely unknown how much you're going to earn each year. It's very, very unknown. And all you can do is control what is in your control. But and just pray, I suppose. So yes, it's stressful.
Cross your fingers, your
Exactly.
toes, touch
Yeah.
wood, and pray. Pray to God.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And just do everything you can. Just try your best and let God do the rest. There you go.
Fantastic. Now, you used a nice phrasal verb there, which I'd like to just highlight, and it is to fall through. So if a deal falls through, it collapses, it doesn't finalize. So you never know if you're going to get it over the line and sign it, or it might fall through. It might collapse and it will not go ahead.
Exactly.
So given that I've just explained a phrasal verb, my favorite, tell us how you got into making content teaching English online whilst
Yeah.
being a commercial real estate broker.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I went to a English speaking university. And then when I had to get a job here, because we're in one of the French speaking regions of Canada, I had to learn the French language in order to work in this area of Canada. So when I learned the French language, I tried to do it. I tried to join a government French course actually first.
Okay.
And they were going at an extremely slow pace. And I really didn't see much improvement in the amount of time I was spending. After that, I decided to just buy a book online, really, and just self-teach myself through a book, a workbook. I made so many mistakes when I began learning the French language. And honestly, it probably took me years, like a few good years, just to get conversational in French. It probably could have taken me 1 year or less if I did not make all the mistakes that I made. So that kind of sparked the idea, just in a little bit of my spare time, just to make ARC English, just to help people avoid all the mistakes that I had to make when I had to learn a new language. And then also, I try to put an emphasis on vocabulary as well and associating that with imagery, because that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I made when I had to learn a new language. I would try translating words back into my native language. I would not associate words with anything tangible and real. I just was trying to memorize words arbitrarily, and it really did not work. It did not work for me. So and then yeah, people started liking the lessons. They found it useful, and I just kept going as it got traction.
Fantastic. So if you could go back in time and relearn French, you mentioned that you made a lot of mistakes. How would you do it differently this time?
Oh God.
You've got a list
For French, yeah. I'll try to keep it concise. When I was learning French, as I just mentioned, I was translating words back into my native language, English. That really doesn't work when learning vocabulary. You really need to make it tangible and relevant to your real life. Okay. Also, the order I was learning in, it was a little bit off. I would say the best order for anyone listening who's trying to learn English or any language would be, I would start with the most common vocabulary and grammar, just basic grammar, not super advanced grammar, just basic grammar and vocabulary. And then I try to work on your listening and reading simultaneously, which will translate into your speaking and writing simultaneously. And also I know this isn't what a lot of people want to hear. And I know that there are, unfortunately, a lot of people on the internet that spew this. People won't like me for saying this, but you should limit your expectations when it comes to becoming fluent in English. You're not supposed to become fluent in a matter of 3 months or 6 months or even a year. It can very well take you years until you're legitimately comfortable spontaneously having conversations in English. So for the people who, I know you're excited, I know you're eager, I know you want to learn English really quickly, but unless you have 8 to 10 hours per day to learn English, which most people do not have that, you're probably not going to learn or become fluent in less than a year. It's not very realistic. I've seen it happen. It is possible. The people who I've seen do it, they treated it like a full-time job. They spent about 8 hours or more per day, genuinely and actively trying to improve their English. And they managed to do it in less than a year. But for most people, expect it to take a little more than a year.
Exactly. I think the most important thing is that you enjoy learning that language and you have a clear motivation to learn that language, because if you don't, it's not going to be a long-term goal and task that you're going to do in your day-to-day. Because like, if you don't enjoy doing it, then you're not really going to reap the rewards and take all of this information in. And many people who are watching this, I assume that you enjoy English and learning English and perfecting your English whilst already having a good level. And the same thing happens with me in Spanish, that my Spanish is almost fluent, but it's still nowhere near perfect. And then I'll have good days and bad days, days where I remember really advanced words and phrases, and other ones where I'm pointing at something really basic and I don't remember what it's called. So expect almost the unexpected. Make sure you measure your expectations, because you can be, I don't know, like let down if you think that you're going to be fluent in a year, because a lot of like marketing campaigns tell you that this is possible in exchange for giving them a lot of money. But you need to taper your expectations and just learn to love it and enjoy what you're doing. And then over time, you will see the results and consistently improve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another mistake I made too was I really didn't focus too much on the fundamentals. I would try to use apps just to make me fluent, but I would just use the apps like Duolingo. I wouldn't do anything else essentially. I was trying to take the lazy way to learning a language, and unfortunately that does not work, at least for me and most people I know who are learning languages. So apps are good. They're good. They're good supplements. It's like a good bonus to your learning. It's very supplementary to your learning, but you will need to learn the grammatical rules. You will need to learn the figure of speech in English. You will need to learn the most common vocabulary words and phrasal verbs and idioms. You can't get around that. And you want to learn it in a way, like you mentioned, that's enjoyable and natural to your lifestyle. That way, it's going to be more difficult to forget words. A lot of people will leave comments or send me a message on Instagram saying, how can I remember words better? Well, simply put, you're going to remember probably 80% or more of the things you physically do. And you're probably going to remember like less than 20% of the things you just read and listen to on TV. Like it has to be applicable. It has to be relevant to your lifestyle. That flag in the background there. You want to associate the word flag with what you see in the background on your camera. You want to picture that every time you see or hear the word flag. You want things to be natural and real and tangible, as opposed to learning words that you won't really use or that aren't really applicable to your specific lifestyle, if that makes sense. So
no, 100%. The more you enjoy it, the more you'll get from it. And if you're learning words and phrases that are not really that useful in your routine, then of course you'll learn them temporarily, and then you probably won't use them again for months or years. And in that case, it's
exactly
completely normal to not remember, because it's maybe not an important word. Like in every language, I think the average number of words that we use is like 1,000. So of course there are more advanced and specific words that we like sprinkle in at the same time, but you can understand, let's say 90% of all conversations if you know, let's say 1,000, 2,000 words, and then the rest is just perfecting and getting better and better.
Exactly. You just need a decent foundation and you can naturally just build on that. And like if we're talking about real estate in French, I'll be able to speak fluently. If we're talking about bird watching in French, I won't know how.
Or English.
Words. So yeah, or English. So there you go. Even in English, even in our native language, like still, yeah. Excellent. There you go.
Now, I imagine in Canada there are a lot of beautiful birds. So that's a nice little segue, a nice little way to connect the conversation to the next part, because I've never been to Canada. I would love to go. It's a huge country and it's famous for its nature above all. But if I were to go to Canada for a few weeks, maybe a month, where should I go and what should I do, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I'd probably give different advice to people who just want to travel for fun and people who would want to immigrate to live here. For people who would just like to travel for fun, I would recommend going to the west coast of the country of Canada, which is where the city of Vancouver is, on the Pacific Ocean, just across from Japan. So Vancouver and the province, the region of British Columbia, as they call it in Canada, it has some of the most beautiful nature on planet Earth. The extremely blue lakes, the huge mountains surrounding it, all the oases, sorry, an oasis and oases. So yeah, it's second to none, honestly. I don't think I've seen anywhere else on Earth that matched the beauty of places like Banff and Whistler and certain parts of the country of Canada on the west coast. If you're looking for stuff to do in a city with a lot of festivals and events, I'd recommend places more on the east, which is like Toronto and the city of Montreal, where I live. They're very close to New York City. For anyone who knows where New York City is, it's just above it. So these places they'll be more densely populated, more people, and they'll have more stuff going on, particularly in the summer and a little bit in the winter. Okay. I don't recommend to anybody to come to Canada during the winter. I only recommend
not Winnipeg.
Yes, especially not Winnipeg. I only recommend that you come in the summer. So let it be known to the record. It's on camera. I said never come during the winter. If you're going to come, only come during the summer. The weather is quite beautiful in the summer. It's quite brutal in the winter.
So it's interesting because I think this is a generalized thing in North America that there is a big difference between each season. So the winters tend to be really, really cold and the summers really, really hot, which isn't really like the United Kingdom, where all year round it's kind of mild. Like in winter, you might have -5 degrees, but that's kind of the maximum. And in summer, you might have 30 degrees, but it rarely happens. We're always kind of around the ballpark figure of 10, 15 degrees, and it's very stable. In Canada, how cold can it get in winter and how hot can it get in summer?
So because Canada is such a huge country, it's massive. On the west coast around Vancouver, it only gets to about -5, -10 at the worst. It rarely snows. Might snow a little bit, but not much. It'll mostly rain in Vancouver. It's actually more mild out there. If you go over past Vancouver to Toronto, Montreal, of course, Winnipeg, the weather can in all three of those cities can get down to about -30 degrees Celsius with the wind chill. So think about a day, a really hot summer day where it's +30 degrees Celsius. Now think of the opposite of that. Think about -30 degrees Celsius. It's at certain points, it's actually not really safe to be outside for too long. So it's very uncomfortable during the winter at certain times. And then in Winnipeg, where I come from, it can get down to -40 to 50 degrees Celsius on the worst days with the wind chill. And you just stay inside during those days. Sometimes they actually cancel school if the weather is a little bit too cold during those days. So
it's funny because in the UK, I remember we'd have like snow days from time to time when they would also cancel school. But it was usually if it just snowed a little bit, like this amount, something like that. And some people wouldn't be able to get to school because the roads would be very slippery, they'd be very icy, it'd be quite dangerous. But just because we're not really prepared for the snow, despite the fact it maybe snows a couple of weeks per year, we cancel school very, very quickly if we see just a little bit of snow. But in Canada, I guess it's the normal to have snowy days, at least around your area.
It's funny how that works. They do the same thing in America too. They just get a little bit of snow, they'll like shut down the whole city. But yeah, in Canada, it's really normal. And that's also a theory that the reason why Canadians might be a little more humble is because they have to deal with such brutal winters for decades of living there. But it is interesting. I think if I wasn't born here, I don't know if I'd live here permanently, to be honest. The weather is a little brutal. Yeah.
Cool. Now, you mentioned America, the United States. What would you say are the biggest differences between the USA and Canada? I know, for me at least, the accent at times is difficult to distinguish between a Canadian and an American, apart from like one sound, which is like "oh." I think in Canada and Canadian English, like "oh." Is this true?
That's such a difficult question because both countries are so diverse. They're not homogenous like China. They're not homogenous like Japan. They're super diverse. People from all over the world come to live in America. Everywhere in the world, they come to live in America. Same thing with Canada. So to save, there's times where you can go for a walk and you won't even encounter someone who is like 100% Canadian or 100% American. Like that's just how mixed the countries are. So Um, I understand where you're coming from, though. With Canada, even growing up, I met some people who speak like that, but it's far and few between.
Hmm.
And they usually come from a more rural part of the country.
Yeah.
In America, same thing. It's also a huge country. Every single state in the United States is like a different country almost. Like they have their different laws, their different rules. They have different accents in almost every single state as well.
Mhm.
So it's hard to just say an American accent. It's like there's a Southern accent, a Northern accent, an accent if you come from California, things like that. So the difference, yeah, I guess that's not really an answer, but the difference between the accents is very difficult to say, just due to the diversity.
Uh-huh.
But if you think about like the president of the United States, if you've ever heard them speak on a camera or a video somewhere, and then if you've heard the prime minister of Canada speak, if you compare those two voices, that will clearly illustrate the difference between the two accents.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is everybody's homework. You need to compare listening to, what's his name? Justin
Joe Biden
Trudeau?
or Justin
Yeah.
Trudeau and Joe Biden or whoever. And yeah, it's
Let's see if we can spot the difference and distinguish them, because I do think there is, generically speaking, a different, let's say, base accent in America and Canada. But like I said, if I'm just listening, I would first say, okay, they're North American. And likely just because of the size of the population in the USA, I would say that they're American. But you never know, it might be Canadian. And one thing that I've heard is that in Canada, people are very, very polite. You mentioned they're very humble also. That people use like sorry and thank you a lot, which is a very British thing too. That even if we haven't done anything wrong, a lot of the time I will say sorry. Like if I'm just like, I don't know, I bump into someone and I was like, oh, sorry. Is this something that Canadians stereotypically do?
Yeah, we will say thank you more frequently than Americans will. We'll say you're welcome more frequently, and we'll say sorry more frequently. That is true. In America, if you hold the door open for someone, or if someone holds it open for you and you say thank you, they'll just say, yeah, okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it is a little different. It's a little bit different, but I'd say it's pretty minor though. It's not noticeable in every situation. And then again, that goes back to the whole diversity thing.
Mm-hmm.
If there's someone who's from Jamaica who lives in Toronto in Canada, they may not interact and behave like a Canadian. That's another thing. So, but yeah, for the most part, you're right.
Uh-huh. Cool. Now, we're going to move on and go over some modern slang, but I'm also curious, are there any specific Canadian slang words?
Oh man, that goes back to what we've been talking about. The countries are so big, so in different regions, there's different slangs essentially. Like in Winnipeg, a lot of people especially in the hockey world, they'll speak a certain way. They'll say "buddy" a lot. They'll say "a" more. They'll speak more like a stereotypical Canadian in the hockey scene in Canada. If you go to Toronto, that's like a whole different world. People kind of copy UK slang actually in Toronto. They kind of copied patois, like Jamaican, the way Jamaicans speak, and they kind of copy UK slang and kind of mix it together. I don't like it personally. I think it sounds very the way that people from Toronto speak sounds very goofy, but it's different. And then of course you have the French part of Canada. The French slang here is like it's very, very unique to the province of Quebec. French speakers around the world will not speak like that anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So I try to excuse me.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah,
let it out.
Gotta clear my throat. I personally try to speak in a neutral manner, but the slang, it's it's very diverse, just like the countries are also very diverse. If you go to the South, if you go to Texas in America, they'll use a bunch of crazy idioms you've never heard before and crazy similes like I'm hotter than a groundhog that just took a bath or something stupid like that. And it's like, I just, it's, it's hard to, it's hard to, list off all the different slangs that are like unique to a certain country. It's different region by region for sure. So, yeah.
No, I agree. Like I'm asking all of these questions, but then in the United Kingdom, despite being a much, much smaller place, there are still huge differences between how people speak in even like North London, East London, or comparing Bristol with Manchester, with Birmingham, with Leeds. Like there are so many subtleties. And for example, a lot of English teachers online on Instagram and YouTube, we always say like British English or American English, when in reality, British English doesn't really exist, because you might have like Southern English, then you might have like Midlands English, you might have Northern English. And then if we're thinking about Britain, we also have Wales and we have Scotland, and the accents change so much from London to Glasgow, for example. So there are these generalizations to put everyone kind of in a box, but then you've got to be there and see it with your own eyes and compare these slight differences, in particular with Scotland, that for me, it's like another world, that there are lots of slang phrases that they use that I would never have even heard of.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for English learners and just language learners in general to be mindful of this, just because don't get discouraged if you can't understand every accent of English, even as a native speaker. As native speakers, we don't understand like all the different accents of the English language. And if you ever go to a big city, there will be diversity and there will be people who speak with different accents. So be mindful of that. Try to learn English in the most universal way possible, because you're not really going to be able to avoid speaking to people who do have different accents. And that's something I'm trying to get better at too with French as well, because it's so different in Canada versus the rest of the French speaking world. So, but yeah,
exactly. 100%. Now, let's go over some of this slang. I'm going to ask you some conversation questions with some relatively common modern slang. So my first question, given that you mentioned basketball, who do you think is the GOAT in your favorite sport? Who is the greatest of all time in basketball?
I'd have to say Michael Jordan for sure.
No hesitation. Straight
no
away
hesitation. Michael Jordan, not LeBron James. It's just the attitude. Michael Jordan's attitude was just so insanely competitive. I've yet to seen a player replicate that, really. I think Kobe Bryant came close, but I think it's pretty much impossible to replicate the mindset that Michael Jordan brought to basketball.
Yeah. And if anyone hasn't watched the documentary on Netflix, what was it called? The Last Dance.
Yeah.
I would wholeheartedly recommend it. And this is from someone who isn't really interested in basketball. Like, I love any sports documentary. I'm watching the Tour de France one at the moment, and I don't really cycle ever. I watch Drive to Survive about the Formula One, and for me, it's so boring to watch the F1, but in documentary form, it's amazing.
There you go. Yeah. Cinematic.
Exactly.
And then,
all right. Next question. What kind of music are you vibing to these days? And to vibe to something is kind of to enjoy something.
Oh, wow. The music I vibe to. I like I like very weird music, to be honest. I literally listen to music in languages that aren't even in English. But if you want to talk specifically about English music, I would say hip hop is what I vibe to the most. I'd say hip hop music, um, particularly music with very intense instrumentals. Yeah,
Okay,
that's what I'll say.
cool. So yeah,
What about
hip
you?
hop. To be honest, I'm quite similar that I listen to music in different languages. I've been trying to listen to more French music recently. And I've seen that actually there is good French hip hop and rap. There are a couple of artists that come to mind. The first one is, I think it's called Grand Corps Modal or something similar.
Okay.
I don't know if that's exactly his name, but I'll list it in the comments.
Mhm.
But it's kind of a lot of storytelling, so it's easier to understand what he's saying because all of the lyrics kind of make sense, and each verse has its own story to it. So this is really good. And then another similar one is Big Flo and Ollie.
Yep, I know Big Flo and Ollie.
And it's great because again, their rapping verses are relatively easy to understand for a learner, and you can relate to them, or at least I can, because one of them is about when they were 30 years old or turning 30 years old, and they speak about nostalgic things from their childhood, like
Mm,
Pokemon. And I loved Pokemon back in the day
yeah.
and maybe still do. So I can relate to their lyrics.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the hip hop's also super broad. I mean, there's people who tell stories. There's people who just do stupid music for entertainment just because it's fun. Uh, there's the stuff from the 90s too. I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember 90s music, but yeah. Um,
Yeah. 100%. All right, now let's do one more slang word and conversation question. And it's one
mhm.
that I think many people will have heard of before. And it is to ghost someone, which is kind of to ignore someone or not respond to someone. So, Avery, have you ever ghosted anyone?
If I ever ghosted someone, I probably have a few times in the past. Um, I would only do it if it is called for, though. Do not ghost people if it's uncalled for. Just try to communicate. But if you have an extreme situation that calls for ghosting, then ghost away.
Just away, go for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
What about
Cool.
you, Lewis? Have you ever ghosted someone?
I mean, I probably yes. Usually unintentionally or without any malice or kind of aggression towards that person, because I'm not very good at responding to people in the moment. So if somebody
Mm,
sends me a message, in particular, if they're inviting me to do something, let's say today we're recording this on a Saturday, I don't really feel like going out this evening. I don't really want to go out. So
mm,
if someone sends me a message like, "Hey Lewis, what are you doing?" then I might ghost them because I know that the follow-up question will be like, "Do you fancy having a beer or do you fancy going out?" And if I don't want to, sometimes I'd rather just not say anything and then get back to them the next day. It's like, "Oh, sorry, mate. I didn't feel very good. I was a bit under the weather. But yeah, maybe
yeah.
next weekend."
Yeah, yeah. That's the classic move.
You have nothing nice to say. Don't say anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Now,
Fair enough.
let's do a couple of idioms before we
Mhm.
finish and call
Yeah.
it a day.
Mhm.
I mentioned one which is really common that I use a lot, and it is to be under the weather.
Mhm.
If you are under the weather, you're a little bit sick. I explained this idiom in the last few conversations. So, Avery, when was the last time that you were under the weather?
Literally a week ago, I was under the weather. Yeah, feeling pretty bad. Had some sort of throat infection. I think my voice is still a little coarse, but yeah,
Okay.
that was the last time I was under the weather. What about you, Lewis?
Um, to be honest, I've been in good health recently. I'm constantly sneezing because I have hay fever and maybe my eyes are itchy. I'm blowing my nose, but that doesn't really count as being under the weather. It's just a little bit annoying. But touch wood, hopefully,
Yeah.
I won't be under the weather anytime soon.
Yep. Exactly. Fingers
Fingers
crossed.
crossed. Jinx.
Yeah.
There's a nice little word that if you say something and somebody else says exactly the same phrase or word at the same time, in English, we say jinx. And then when you were growing up as a child, usually that would mean that you weren't allowed to speak until a certain moment. I don't remember exactly the rules, but basically, if anyone says jinx, it's because two people have said the same word or phrase at exactly the same time. Jinx. Awesome. All right, Avery, final question. Are you a couch potato? And a couch potato is kind of a lazy person who likes to spend a lot of time on the couch, on the sofa. So are you a couch potato?
I wish, but I can't be due to the nature and the instability of my job. So, yeah, in a perfect world, I would, but unfortunately, I cannot be.
Exactly. You have no choice in the matter.
Yeah. What about you?
I mean, a little bit. I've got to admit, I work remotely. I'm always in my flat. Even if I'm working sometimes, I'm working from my couch, maybe with some kind of series in the background or a YouTube video. So I always like being productive and I like doing exercise, but I also like being at home. I am a bit of a homebody. So I'm comfortable if I'm at home, which is maybe why I sometimes ghost people when they want me to go out. So yeah, even if I don't want to be a couch potato, I am a little bit.
Got you.
Cool. All right. I think that'll do for today. We can wrap up here. But thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and listening to what Avery had to say about his life, Canada, real estate, and so on. And if you do have any more questions for myself or for Avery, feel free to drop us a question in the comments. Don't forget to like the video as well to spread it out to other people who want to improve their English listening skills. And Avery, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me, Lewis. For anyone listening who's trying to learn English, I'm happy to help you. Shoot me a message on any platform. It's just Arc English on whatever platform. So there you go.
Excellent. So enjoy the rest of your day and we'll see you next week.
All right.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and see you next time.